Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the interactive discussion where we're going to focus on today is graduate unemployment and development advancement. So we want to go a little bit further from the keynote address of Dr. Supachai and really try to better understand the issues that are at stake right now, with a particular emphasis on youth. So in terms of the speakers, Ms. Tkeshelashvili, we've already had the chance to get to know. Dr. Supachai, I just introduced. Ambassador Orabi as well, former Foreign Minister of Egypt, former Egyptian ambassador to Germany, as well as cultural diplomat, a member of the ICD Advisory Board. And finally, Jürgen Janssen. Now, Jürgen Janssen, as I said, is a man actually of many responsibilities. For this discussion, very relevant is your role being in charge of the United Nations Global Compact network in Germany. He's also working for the GIZ, which maybe later you can tell them a little bit about, but the main development agency actually here in Germany. So I'm really very, very happy to be able to include these panelists on the discussion. Maybe we can begin in gentleman style, ladies first. And I'll ask Ms. Tkeshelashvili maybe to follow up on some of the themes that you were dealing with in your keynote address and give you a chance also to offer a brief response to some of the theses also that Dr. Supachai presented as we look at this broader issue, graduate unemployment, youth development, and advancement. In the sense currently, I would say Europe finds itself in a state of crisis, as we know. As we look at Northern Africa, Egypt would be obviously the first example that comes to mind. Tunisia as well. We're finding the situation where it's getting very, very urgent. We have a lot of youth who are very talented, who are very educated, and for lots of reasons, the challenge is getting to that next step, getting to the job that they need. In some cases, the jobs are there, and it's really a matter of connecting it. In other cases, it's an issue of, let's say, job creation. So, Ms. Tkeshelashvili, as you look at these issues from, let's say, the point of view of Georgia, but also beyond that, where do you see the main priorities of global governance when it comes to the United Nations, as well as national governments? Are there opportunities that are there that maybe we're not making the most of? What would your suggestions be?
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess the situation in that sense differs from country to country and from the region to the region, even though there are commonalities. For the small countries like Georgia, if we take that example, with the youth employment and then job creation in that sense, more of a problem that we faced was the brain drain, so to say, of the people going out from the country at some point of the time, rather than the case when you would have had unemployment issue being dealt with in such a ways that you would have had no opportunities for the young people to find the jobs, but then there would have been no choice from the young people actually to make the choice to stay in the country in that sense, because the jobs were not interesting to them. So in that sense, the whole change of the country and reform of the country created a situation when the country has become competitive in terms of an interest location for the young population, because in that sense, it was not only the payment that is allocated with the job that you are getting as a young person, but then how much you see yourself being realized in that job and then have perspective for the career growth as well, even though we encourage very much interaction of our younger population when it comes to the outside world as well, with no fear that there would be no comeback with the newly graduates, let's say, of the universities that we would have encouraged for them to go out and then study. We've had more of a problem with all the changes that we've had with the older generation more rather than with the younger generation, because what we've experienced is that with all this changed as a huge change from the post-Soviet past into the new sort of future of the country, younger generation has showed more of an adaptability to that change. So the challenge for the government was how to make sure that the older generation, the generation that was already full-fledged, developed in terms of careers, but then had different skills and knowledge that was more brewed into the Soviet infrastructure rather than modern infrastructure, how we would make them capable of adapting to the new reality. I mean, you could see in my example as well, government was much younger than ordinarily you see. I mean, after the revolution in other countries as well, because that was the time when sort of a new generation took over when it comes to governance or the business relationships in the country in that sense as well. It's a continuous challenge for now as well to deal with that situation, obviously. But then again, with the development of the country, then the challenge of a new type of the employment for the much more developed youth came as an issue as well, and that is a balance that needs to be obviously found for any government to deal with in that sense.
Thank you. Ambassador Orabi, I'd love to hear your perspectives, especially as someone who I really do consider as a cultural diplomat. I still remember the lecture you gave at Humboldt University to the students of the class a number of years ago. We just had an excellent conversation as well, specifically about the case of Egypt. Now, obviously, this is a major issue for Egypt now. It was a major issue before the revolution. And I think, as we were just discussing, cultural diplomacy can also maybe even have a positive role to play in this process of actually improving the situation. So I'd love to hear your feedback in general on the issue, and then also specifically, what can cultural diplomacy do, or how can cultural diplomacy assist in the issue of youth development and unemployment?
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I'm really happy to be in Berlin. I stayed here in this city almost 80 years, so I have a lot of compassion and I would say love to this city and every street, every corner, every place. So I'm so emotional to be here, and especially I had also a good opportunity to work with Mark when he was just starting, to establish this idea of cultural diplomacy and on the academic field, and I can claim that during my stay here in Berlin, I practiced and conduct a real cultural diplomacy in this country. And I think if you will visit the internet by any chance, you will find a lot of activities we had. Maybe we can talk about it later. I came from Egypt, and everybody, of course, remember that we already had our revolution on the 25th of January 2011, and the youth and young people, they were the driving force for this revolution, and they are the one who sacrificed and paid the heavy price actually to give us freedom and liberty in Egypt. And now those young people, they were deprived from their rights, and they're still suffering the same thing like before the revolution, and even maybe worse. And I can tell you that the young people in Egypt, they are depressed and even frustrated from after 2 years of the revolution, because there is no hope, or I would say new chances for them to have good opportunities in this country to work and to innovate and to look to the future in a bright way. The revolution actually was hijacked by a different group or by other groups, and these groups now governing the country, they're running the show, and most of the government now, people like me with white hair, there is no young people in this leadership at all. So I can tell you that the young people in Egypt, they are so frustrated, and there is, of course, a lack of opportunities to have new jobs, and our tourism industry completely destroyed. Our economy is on the verge to collapse. So you can imagine the bad situation for the young people in our country. So those people will never accept the situation as it is. I guess they will have a new round of revolution in the near future, because nothing changed actually in Egypt, and I'm so sorry to say that after this drastic change in our system, and we hoped, all of us, to have better prospects and better potentials for the country, but unfortunately we are going to the other direction. I'm not against the political Islam at all. I am in favor of this system. I am in favor that Islam will prevailing in our region. But I am telling you that the group which is now in power, I guess they have their own plans and their own strategy in order to dominate this area without paying enough attention to the economy in Egypt or the welfare of the Egyptian people. So that's why we will suffer for in the short term and maybe in the long term also for many years to come. The future is not so bright for the young people in Egypt, and as I said, even the education system, we didn't witness any kind of development so far. So even the cultural diplomacy, which was part of our tools in order to improve the image of Egypt abroad, I think it will start to diminish now, because you are not able to use your soft power, because the soft power now, even some people in Egypt looking to this soft power as a bad thing, and we should not use it abroad. Our participation today in the ITB, I think the Minister of Tourism, he is in a very bad situation. What kind of message he is sending to people to go to Egypt? We have unrest, we have lack of stability, and so the concept, or let us say the image of Egypt is not so bright like in before. The revolution is not responsible for all this deterioration. Actually, the Egyptian people, they are responsible. All of us, we are responsible. All of us, we are losers. And of course, the young people, they will suffer and they will pay a heavy price, because we are at the end of our career now, so we have nothing to lose. But I think my daughter and my grandchildren, I think they will suffer, and they will have a very, I would say, a difficult time in Egypt for the next years to come. So public diplomacy in Egypt now is suffering, I would say, and cultural diplomacy is the same thing. The image of Egypt, I think we need to work very hard to improve it and to regain it again. Because Egypt, for me, I spent 35 years of my life outside Egypt, so I know Egypt from outside. I know the weight of this country. I know the weight of our civilization. So I know how people is looking to us. But unfortunately, we have to rebuild this image from zero and to try to be more, I would say, advocate to the principles of the cultural diplomacy and public diplomacy in order to have the same image for the Egyptian people. And thank you, Mark, for giving me this opportunity. And I'm really honored and happy to see young faces here in this audience. And this gives me a lot of, I would say, optimism. And I'm sure the young people, they will be the driving force for a better world and better life. Thank you.
Ambassador Orabi, before I let you hand over the microphone, I want to ask you a follow-up question. 10 days ago, you had a meeting with Secretary of State Kerry. We were discussing earlier also some of the disappointments from Egypt on the side of actually, let's say, external partners, such as the USA, where you maybe have a wonderful speech of President Obama, and then the follow-up sometimes was not what was expected. So what does Egypt expect, or what role could a country like the USA have today, if any, in terms of really supporting the progress of Egypt to make sure that it's not another, we were talking earlier today, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. And also, since we have two representatives of the United Nations here, what do you expect also of global governance, or how could the UN also get involved in the sense, how do you see, let's say, the role of external partners in that sense?
Okay. Yes, we had a very long discussion with Secretary Kerry. It was his first visit as Secretary of State. He came to Egypt many times as one of the senators. As Secretary Kerry, we consider him as an expert in the Middle East politics and situations. He knows everybody. He knows all the leaders. But unfortunately, the American, I would say, policy in the Middle East always starts good, and then they cannot finish it, or they cannot have the same, I would say, good results at the end. And look to Iran, Iraq, all the region. And we are totally convinced that Israel is the beginning of any American strategy in the region, and it is the end also for any American strategy in our region. So everything actually is designed to protect Israel and to put Israel to be, I would say, above all the Arab countries in our region. So Secretary Kerry was defending the idea that the Egyptians were struggling for many years to reach a real democracy and to reach a right to elect and to vote and to choose a civilian president. That was his idea, that okay, people, you should strictly adhere to this principle. Don't waste this time, and the fight between you. I am now in the opposition, by the way. I'm not in the government. The fight between the opposition and the government should be through election and parliament and the right channels for a real democracy. So we told him, yes, we accept that, but why you deny the main principles and the main, I would say, parameters of a real democracy, which is the freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom, the whole things which President Obama addressed, or let us say mentioned in his speech in one of the Asian countries recently, I cannot remember where, but he was talking about freedom. So democracy is not just to vote and to elect and to select a president. Actually, Egypt is hijacked by a small group. And this small group, we are now in Egypt almost 93 million inhabitants. 5 million, almost 5 million from the Brotherhood and the other parties. So those people, they hijacked the country, using, yes, the election and using the box to or the ballots to reach power and to be in power. But the majority of the Egyptians, actually, they are not in favor of those people to govern this country. And also Senator McCain, when he was in Cairo, I met him, and he was still telling me, okay, you choose the president and you are against him. You choose this constitution and you are against him, or against it, the constitution. So what country is this? The man himself, he was under the, I would say, a lot of confusion how Egypt will start to march. But anyway, I think the American view, or the message from Secretary Kerry, okay, you have election for the parliament, you should go for this election and you should try to win seats in the parliament, and you should oppose the president and his government through the parliament. That was his thinking, without looking to, I would say, the long strategy or the strategy of the brotherhoods beyond these 4 years. The Americans, they are not looking to it. And we told him, okay, you need to have a new fascism in Egypt. You need to have a new Iran. I'm sorry if it's somebody from Iran, but the Iranian system is not acceptable in Egypt. That's it. But maybe the Iranian people, they accept the regime. But for us, we are not accepting this kind of regime, to have a Murshid and then the president, and the president will be ordered by the Murshid. And this is not acceptable, and we will not tolerate any dictatorship or a new type of dictatorship actually in Egypt. So the future is so, I would say, a lot of uncertainty in the future. And the Americans, they don't realize that. The Americans, for them, they have three main important things. Any president in Egypt should comply with them. The peace treaty with Israel, the Suez Canal to be free and for everybody, and the Egyptian army should have stronger links with the United States. That's it. This is the main things. And after that, they will not care about anything. Also, he was so worried about the meltdown of the Egyptian economy. And this is, going, I would say, moving very fast. And he said this might lead to a chaos, and after this chaos, maybe the army will interfere, and we don't like that.
Ambassador Orabi, if I may, actually, would it be, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to immediately actually get the feedback on that issue of Dr. Supachai, since we're here discussing sort of external partners. In many ways, this panel was built around you, Dr. Supachai. I think this would be a wonderful occasion if you could maybe give us your perspectives in terms of what is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development doing now regarding, let's say, development and also the youth, and also what can it do? What can UNCTAD do, let's say, in the next 10 years? Where do you see opportunities for further engagement?
I am coming from probably a different perspective than from a single country like Egypt, but I do sympathize a lot. Actually, we are now also helping the Egyptian government, not only this government, but since the uprising, we've been trying to give our recommendations and comments on what is to be done, particularly on the investment policy. We're working very closely with the Egyptian government on the investment policy, because you can see that job creation is about investment, what we call creation of productive capacity. We need to have productive capacity, and to be able to mobilize investment is a key thing. If you cannot mobilize it within the country, you would have to mobilize it from outside. And otherwise, there will have to be entities like the UN who can help actually initiate some action in certain areas so that it can have multiplier effect. But let me cite first one major issue at the moment that is valid not only for Egypt but for many countries around the world. Youth unemployment is part of the global unemployment issues. If you look at the ILO, the International Labour Organization kind of analysis, we have lost jobs after the 2008 recession around the world in terms of hundreds of millions of jobs. The jobs that we are gaining are jobs that are in the informal sector. They're not jobs that are secure. They're just loose jobs, household jobs, family jobs. And they're not really jobs that are really secure. Why? Because at the moment, the main preoccupations of banks, corporate societies, households are still with their debt. They all are up to their ears, up to their head with debts. And what they are doing at the moment is what we call deleveraging, unwinding of debts. We are still in there, I mean, people keep saying we're already out of the woods. No, we're not out of the woods. You look at Europe, you look at United States, you look at the rest of the world. We're not out of the woods. We might be in debt about here in 2008. Now it's about here. So we're still trying to unwind the debts. And when you unwind the debts, you don't consume. You don't just go and spend your money on 2 times going on holidays to Sharm el-Sheikh or to somewhere else, but you spend things on your food, on your children's education. You spend on necessity first. So this is the first thing that explains things, that how can countries around, and this come back to the globalization, global governance, and diplomacy. When we went into the crisis, G20 joined hands in jointly stimulating their economies. Financial stimulus was done throughout the world, and we actually crushed the economy out of the crisis. But when we came out of the crisis, we were not yet out of the woods, and people thought, we are all okay. We now go back to austerity. We're going to cut this, cut that. You cannot keep cutting things. In order to reduce debts, you must grow. This is basic economic 101. And yet politicians never learned. They want to please the financial market. They said, look, we cut our budget. We cut the wages of our bureaucrats. We cut the number of projects, transportation routes and all these things. These are just disastrous. You need to find means to maintain some of these activities so that there can be investment and creation of productive capacity, what we call demand deflation. We are going through a demand deflationary period, which is so severe. I don't think people understand this. Politicians never understand. I mean, they think that if they can please the financial market, that they can borrow easily with better terms, then they are out of it. No, you look at the way the rating agencies and all these people are treating all these countries with austerities. The more austerities, the more debt you are accumulating. Haven't they learned all this? So my first and prime advice is, what we are advising all this country is, please, austerity is when you are beginning to see some lights at the end of the tunnel. When you are beginning to have some growth, creating some jobs, then you can have austerity that say, okay, now you have jobs, please save something. Don't consume everything. But now when you are dissaving, You are not saving. You are just using everything. You sell your land, your cars, everything. You are telling people to consume. Nothing will happen like that. So this is the first thing that we have to do. The second one is in the external demand. Domestic demand is for countries to do what I just said. I mean, just don't leave the stimulus so soon. The second one is external stimulus. We have to maintain trade. And the moment we cannot finish the Doha round, I mean, it's not the end of the world with Doha round, but with trade decelerating every year, you see. Last year, you know how much trade grew? It grew by 2.5%. And for a normal year, it would be 6-7%. In 2009, we grew by 13%. I think 2009 we dropped by 13%. 2010 we grew back by 13% in terms of trade. Last year 2.5. This year maybe 3%. So trade is underperforming. And why is trade underperforming? Because we don't have this agreement around the world. Because of political expediency tell us that we use trade as a means to expand our power. So we're not making use of trade to be able to be liberally trading among ourselves and creating more access. We're just saying, WTO and us at UNCTAD together every half year we produce a report to G20 to report to them how much the G20 are doing in terms of restricting their trade and investment. And every half a year we're telling them, look, you promise not to do anything, and you go back home, you start doing the same thing you said you're not going to do. So last year alone, the trade disputes at the WTO amount to something which is twice, let's say, the sum of 2010 and 11. 2012, the trade dispute is more than the sum of the trade dispute in the 2 years. So you can see that the political issues, economic issues are coming to the heads, and they don't. So we need to have markets being kept open. We need to have trade flow. We need to be able to succeed in trying to wean people away from trade restriction. The third one is in the areas of labor policy. Normally we always look to Germany. Germany is one of the most successful countries in devising labor policies that link wage level to productivity, to labor productivity. This is done, I think, towards the end of the Schröder era and things like that. But this is a very successful thing that happened in Germany. Why wages in Greece, in Italy, in Spain, in Portugal went up to the roof because of the cheap credit policies. Wages went through the roof. Productivity stayed put or even declined. Germany just the opposite. Germany gave full rein to the innovation policies. At the same time, keep control on the wage rises. So unemployment actually dropped, but more employment come up. And the last point is on services industry. We try to again, I was saying this, you probably haven't noticed, we want to see services trade, which is now growing twice as fast as merchandise trade. We want to see services industry being practiced more by countries around the world, and this is a source of new jobs, particularly for advanced economy. And this can be jobs in IT-related activities, in creative activities, in entertainment, in entrepreneurship, in self-employment, and things like that. And this is one big project that we are trying to push around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Supachai. I'd like to take questions from the audience, give you a chance to also ask Dr. Supachai. Before I do so, however, since we have Jürgen Janssen here, I think it's very important that you offer, as the only German on the panel, as well as a representative of the United Nations Global Compact Network here in Germany, your own brief comments and perspectives for the audience, and then we can immediately take questions and feedback from the audience.
Thank you so much. And I think a lot of topics have already been talked about. Maybe one thing, even if I sound like a representative of a business association when I'm telling that, I think going to the same direction as Dr. Supachai's, the flexibility of labor markets is, I think, a very important thing. Having said that, for the Global Compact labor standards, which also mean protection of workers from being fired, is very important. So there is a very, you have to find a very, to negotiate your way around, where is the right way. I think this is a very difficult thing. Another thing that might be interesting with regard to graduate unemployment is the flexibility and the freedom of movement of young people. That if there are no jobs in your home country, you have to have the opportunity, if you want to to go to another country and start from university to get a job.
But is it possible to do that? Is it,
well, it is difficult, and I just
tell you it is not feasible at all.
well, okay. Looking at the intra-European Union, it is possible.
Yeah,
but okay, putting in the bigger picture, then we are the multilateralism, what you talked about earlier. The other thing is that it has to be a one-way ticket, right? That is what you say. It's a brain drain. It's a very, very serious problem for many countries. It's the brain drain. I think there are policies in place or instruments there that allow for circular migration, so that people go for 5 years and come back to their home country, which is also then it's very important that the degrees are being acknowledged. So we are into the educational system. So it all comes together at certain points. I think another thing, what from more of the global compact, because we normally focus on the very basic topics of child labor and human rights policies and so on. Looking at the company level, diversity, especially for the multinational companies, is becoming an issue from quite a few different points of view. One is that the big companies are present in 100 countries. They cannot do this with their headquarters staff from the United States being sent all over the world. That will not work. So what they need is a diverse workforce. This is what they need, and their talent management systems already are very keen to address this. So there is an opportunity for especially for graduates from different countries to find job in multinational companies if the degrees are appropriate to the needs of the company. You also have to say that, right? And the challenges are also there. We talked about this last year in the German Global Compact Network when we're talking about the diversity aspects. There are also the negative points, which is discrimination. Well, not just for disabled people. We're having the Women Empowerment Principle on the UN level just introduced, and now we have the Children's Rights and Business Principles being introduced. So there is a lot of going on, but the challenges within an organizations are there. There are opportunities, but there are also, I think, challenges. And in times of a crisis, something has to give. Right? And we see we cannot stay the way we are. We just say, okay, we do not open up ossificated labor markets. There has to be more flexibility. But keeping in mind that we don't end up with employment only in the informal sector. A lot of difficult, but there are also opportunities as we see that, and also from the business community.
No, thank you very much. I think very important points from the German perspective as well as the UN perspective. I'd now very happily invite questions and comments from the audience. I think firstly, of course, there are, I'm sure, follow-up questions for Dr. Supachai, but really it's a very prominent audience. So as always, if you could briefly raise your hand if you'd like to pose a question, and then when you pose the question, stand and briefly introduce yourself. That would be great. My colleague Elvira has the microphone. Okay.
I'll get your email from Mark at some point of time, and I'll sort of send my contacts to you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and panoramic view on the world economics and free trade agreement. I have actually two questions. My name is Badre. I'm a student here at the Institute. I have two questions. One is for His Excellency Dr. Supachai, and the second question is to His Excellency the former Minister of Egypt. My first question is concerning what you have covered or probably uncovered in what you talked about in terms like the free trade agreement. I heard you talking a lot about the European Union, about the US, about the BRICS countries as like main actors in this free trade agreement, but I did not hear you talking about like Africa, about like Latin America, about Asia. Like those parts of the world are basically the fountains of the raw materials about which the economy is based. Also, these are also the fountain of like the manpower, the engineers that work in those like big countries. Also, you did not talk about like the corporate social responsibility toward those countries in which like we have like rising like a ratio of poverty, like in Central America and in Africa and Middle East and other. So I would like you please to like shed some light on those two aspects. And my second question is to former Minister of Egypt. I mean, you said that you are in the opposition, and you draw a kind of like a very scary picture about the actual government of Egypt. Unfortunately, the discourse that you just presented does not sound different from the discourses politicians used to present to the West about the Arab countries, in the sense that they always like try to scare like those governments about like the Islamists. So I don't see anything like different from the discourse you just said about like the present government. Probably, yeah, you're right, but why don't you, as an opposition, why don't you engage in constructing a strong government instead of like being a destructive opposition? And thank you.
Thank you for asking this question. I have left out more than 101 things that I would like to say. Actually, it was just in my mind that I was a bit worried with the new trend, the so-called 21st century trend of regionalism that I had to give this morning to all of you. That the trends that I was warning you was that be careful, because if you don't strengthen multilateral negotiations, the way that every one of us can participate in the rule-making exercise around the world, this will be taken back into the hands of the more advanced economies, and this is not healthy for the global economy. I would mean the rest of the world. So when you talked about Asia, Africa, Latin America, I mean them all, that they just cannot stay put. Now, in Africa, there are more than 13 economic integration efforts, more than 13. I've lost count, could be 15 or something, but more than 13, none of which works very well. So the concept of having FTAs for Africa so that you can reduce obstacles at the borders, you can have lower tariffs, no trade restriction, it didn't work so well. I was in one country in Africa that can export vegetable oil to a next door country, and I had to go to the next country just to negotiate on their behalf that please buy vegetable oil from this country and not to buy vegetable oil from Asia, because they all bought vegetable oil from Malaysia, from Thailand, from all these countries, but not from the neighboring countries. Many things happen. So what we are now working in Africa is that trade integration in Africa resolves only 15%. Only 15% of intra-African trade. If you measure this, let me then quote for the whole world. For Europe, it's about 65% to 70% intra-European trade to their total trade with the rest of the world. This is the largest. This is the mother of all trade integration. United States, with the North African free trade area, is about 45%. Asia has done very well. Intra-Asian trade is about 55%. Latin America is only 20%. So you can see that integration has worked well in Asia, in Europe, in the United States, but not in Africa and not so much in Latin America. In Africa, we have agreed with the AU leaders, the African Union leaders. UNCTAD is working with them to have what we call Pan-African integration. So this is a thing that I could not tell you, but because it's a long story. So we are now starting with the three that seem to work best, the three grouping that seem to work best. This is one called EAC, Economic Community of ECA, Economic Community, East African Community, EAC, this East African Community, together with SADC, which is a South African Development Community, and COMESA, which is a community of East and Southern Africa, things like that. These three are working relatively well, and we are now putting them together, mainly East and Southern Africa, to start with a Pan-African undertaking. This is the exercise we are doing. Europe has been trying to do this with them through the so-called EPA, the EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement. It started in 2002 or 3 or 5, something like that, way before Lamy came from the Commission to the WTO, so 2003 or something like that. Now it has not yet finished. This has been 10 years with EPA, because of the fact that Europe didn't deal with the grouping of African countries. They tried to divide and rule for different countries. So at the moment, they have to change tack at the moment. So I can say for Africa, still an uphill fight, but we are helping Africa to be better integrated. Latin America has some successful undertaking like the Andean Pact. Andean Pact has been very well done with Colombia, Ecuador, all these countries along the Andean. But Mercosur didn't work well. I just talked to some of the cabinet members of the Paraguayan government that they are now left out. They are one of the founding members. Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, they used to be part of the Mercosur. Now they are left out because of their rows with Brazilians. So this is not working well. The CAFTA is working better. The Central American Free Trade Arrangement is working better because they have special concession from the United States. But still, South American trade is still only 20%. You look at Asia, it's now 52 to 55%, and it's driven mainly by the so-called global value chain. Or for Asia, it's driven by the so-called regional value chain. It's where you have production network that are located in terms of task allocation. Task allocation, not allocation of products, but tasks. You do this part, you do that part, you do that part. We put it together and we export. So the global value chain has been practiced so well in Asia, so much so that they all are producing bits and pieces everywhere. The iPhone, iPad is produced in China. But the problem with this thing is that the value added for each country, iPad costs $500 on average, iPad $500. The Chinese produce the iPad, they have the value added in terms of their own wages, $6. They get $6 of the $500. So we have what we see as trade development in Asia, trading more, but the way value added in Asia is gained is nothing much to be singing any songs about. So we need to do some more jobs. So I agree with you. I just cited some examples just to give you the idea of 21st century globalization and regionalism. But I do have concerns with different regions that I have portrayed to you, and these are work ongoing that we are still engaged very much on the ground.
Thank you very much, Dr. Supachai. Ambassador Orabi, if you please respond.
Yes, I will be happy, of course, to answer your question, but after my answer, I have to leave because I have another thing to do at 12:30. Look, the Egyptian people, and the youth and the young people, they paid a heavy price to revolt against, President Mubarak and his regime. And we were fighting for social justice, freedom, welfare, better life, all the things. And all of us, all the Egyptians, were extremely happy when we succeed to elect, for the first time in our history, a new civilian president. All of us, opposition and government and everybody, we were under, I would say, tremendous good feelings at that time, because yes, we did it, and we can do it, of course, because the Egyptians have a very long, I would say, culture and civilizations. But all the signs came after, this election. It gives us, a wrong, I would say, perception about this new regime. For the first time in the history of Egypt, we have militias, under the leadership of a group or brotherhood, to attack the Egyptians, to attack their brothers, to attack their citizens, and to kill them, and to torture them, and to arrest them, and to send them to the police after that. For the first time, this is a new thing, the Egyptians, or let us say the society in Egypt, most of us, we have a lot of tolerance, we are accepting the others, we have even always smiling, and they know that, everybody knows that we have a good sense of humor as people. But for the first time, violence now, it is the name of the game in our country. The lack of law and order. So all the signs came after this, regime. It gives us the impression that this is not a democratic regime. This regime is doing their own, or trying to implement their own perception how to govern this country and how to govern even the region. And we are not against Islam at all. You know, Islam is not a new religion. We spent the last 14 centuries, you know, under Islam, and we will spend the rest of our life under Islam. It's a great religion. But maybe the problem is in some of the Muslims, they are trying, you know, to be more fundamentalists than the spirit of Islam itself. So this is the conflict which now arising in our society, that yes, we are happy to have a new president, civilian president, elected by us, or the majority of the Egyptians. 50% of the people of Egypt are against the new constitution, but despite that fact, and the constitution, it should be a sort of, I would say, document to have a social peace in Egypt or in any country. But unfortunately, for the first time also in our history, we have a very sharp division now in the country. And we are on the verge, maybe, I will not say this bad word, civil war, but there is a potential to have a civil war in the near future, because, you know, everybody is fortified, or let us say, trying to not to accept the other, and there is no tolerance at all to listen to the others. I can tell you that on opposition side also we committed a lot of mistakes. I know that, and I can admit that. But in the idea that Egypt, you know, we have now a new Egypt, divided, sharply divided, and there is no tolerance. There is no. I'm sorry to say that about my country. This is not an easy thing to present. You know, the situation like that, the bad situation like that in front of you. You know, I spent the whole my life to defend my country and to try to promote my country and to put my country on the better, I would say, image. But unfortunately, the situation is totally, I would say, bad. The economy is on the verge, as I said, of collapse. Everybody knows that, and there is no tourists at all. There is no investment. Even the Egyptian investors, they left the country. Even the Egyptian investors. So this is not what we are looking for. This is not why the people revolted against, you know, President Mubarak and his regime. So what we need is a better position and better, I would say, life in Egypt, and we are capable to do that. And thank you very much for your question. But I am so sorry that I have to leave now because I have another engagement. But I think tomorrow at 4:30 I will be here again. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Master Orabi. We very much look forward to the keynote address tomorrow. And we appreciate you joining the discussion for today, and we're definitely looking forward to the keynote tomorrow. So maybe, Jürgen, if you could join me a little closer here, we'll bring the circle a little closer, and let's continue. Questions and comments. My colleague should have the wireless mic. There it is. Okay.
Hello, thank you very much, Dr. Supachai, for your speech. I've got a question about the European financial crisis. You said on the one hand it's like the mother of integration for trade and also financial integration. But on the other hand, you said there are some problems with the politicians who don't understand how to act. And my question to you is, how do you convince these politicians, or what is your view on how to solve these European crises which we're in now?
Well, I don't pretend to know better than some of my colleagues, the European politicians. I used to be a politician one time in my life. The first thing is that when Europe decided to join together in a union, they need the kind of arrangement that should make a union work well. Right? You cannot have a union with each participant practicing their own macroeconomic policies in a way that there is no discipline. You used to have the so-called discipline of the Maastricht Treaty, 3 percentage points deficit of the budget. Even Germany couldn't hold that. So there must be something like that, discipline like that, but when people break the discipline, there must be some assistance coming around. So the first thing is to continue with this is my own idea. For politicians, I don't think they have any bad habits or any misunderstanding. I think the regime, the Federation of Europe will have to continue, to deepen. You cannot do monetary union without doing what I call fiscal union. So the fiscal union is not there. You see, and in Europe you have different prices in Spain, in Portugal, in Germany, in Holland. You cannot have this without the fiscal union. So fiscal union meaning that when you join hands in a coalition like this, you must be able to practice joint fiscal position. For example, when one country wants to borrow, it should be borrowing on the basis of a European bond. It could not be Portuguese bond, Spanish bond, Italian bonds with the range of, like in Germany, 1 or 2 or 3 percentage point to 6, 7, 8% in Greece and in Spain. So this makes life very difficult for policymakers. So the first thing is to have fiscal union as well. The second one is that when you practice monetary union, you cannot have a central bank that doesn't have the attributes of a central bank. The European Central Bank is not really a central bank. It has only the interest setting role, which is good enough, but not good enough when Europe gets into difficulty. Because a good role of a central bank, and much needed role of a central bank, is a lender of the last resort. The lender of the last resort, meaning that when any of your members get into difficulty, most of the time there are liquidity problems. You have to be able to lend this to that country. At the moment, ECB cannot do that. What Draghi just said the other day to help rescue the situation was telling the audience that whenever it's needed, ECB will come and buy any bonds that are floated there. But there are conditions there. ECB is not coming in to buy the bond. They haven't bought any piece of bond here yet, but there are conditions. When they're going to buy bonds, you have to do this, do that, so many things. So the second point is that ECB is not really a last resort. And the third one is the one that we have been in argument with the whole world and also with Europe, with the United States, with other countries. Austerity is killing the world economy. Austerity is killing the world economy. Why should we be pleasing the financial market so much? Financial markets has driven the whole global economy into despair. Financial market speculation, shadow economy, derivatives cannot help save the world. So financial system is in disrepair. It's dysfunctional. We have to reform that. But at the moment, it seems that Europe is trying to do things that could please the financial market so that the financial market can come and rescue them. They will not come and rescue you. Financial market will not come to rescue you. Financial markets in Europe, if you do the stress test, as the US has been doing, Europe is in dire strait. But Europe never did that, you see. What they did was to ask the banking union, the banking association, to do their own stress test, which is like scratching your back, you scratch mine, I scratch you. They never came up with the right kind of stress test that the US government has done. Otherwise, you would see that some of the major European banks, I don't want to scare you, but some of the major European banks are not in good shape this day. If this news come out, you would have again another round of crisis in Europe that could. This is not just a triple dip recession for Europe. It's going to be another huge disaster for the global economy. Imagine the banks of Europe that have not yet solved the debt issue from the past, from the mortgages, and now they are added because of the sovereign debt. All banks in Europe used to think that sovereign bonds are top quality bonds. Top quality bonds, sovereign bonds. You look at the market at the moment, all these bonds are just junk bonds. They are just not junk bond because the ECB still promised to buy, not yet bought anything, promised to buy this bond. But nobody buys this bond anymore. And there's no way out. So what I'm going to say, this is the austerity that is really killing the whole thing. You cannot not have the kind of fiscal discipline. You must have fiscal discipline. Not today. It's not today. Today is a fight against deflation. And to fight against deflation, you need demand. To have demand, you have to have investment. To have investment, you must have some growth. That's why Abe is doing the right thing in Japan. For the first time, Japan is seeing the light of how to come out of this permanent crisis in Japan for the last 2 decades. Permanent crisis in Japan. Nobody in Japan would like to see any inflation going up from 0 to 1 or 2%. I've been buying my things, some of my handkerchiefs. I bought handkerchiefs in Japan for the last 20 years. It cost 100 yen per piece. When yen was about 200 yen a dollar, now yen is about 80 or 90 or 100 yen to a dollar. But the 100 yen of the handkerchief that I bought in Japan, still 100 yen handkerchief. So there has been no inflation in Japan at all. Inflation, when it run away, when it's become so high, it's bad. But when there is no inflation, there's deflation. It means that deflation means that your debts are okay. Your debts are cheaper. Yeah, can you understand? You have to have some inflation so that people can have some demand. Because if you don't have inflation, people don't spend. If people think that next year and the year after next, your car will cost less, 10% less, you don't buy a car today. You buy 2 years from now. In 2 years, you are told, wait for a few more years, it will cost 10% less. You keep yourself doing nothing. So what's happened in Japan at the moment is that Abe is trying to push people to come out and buy now. And so it's a good thing that they change this tax. Thank you. Sorry for being so long.
No, thank you very much for an excellent response. Let's continue. I'm not sure who's first. Okay. Please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, my name is Paul Orabi, and I'm also an MA student here. I want to ask, you recommend that we discourage austerity by investing and government investing in themselves and thereby creating jobs for the unemployed graduates. So with governments that are very poor, going back to Africa and Latin America, where you can hardly have enough resources from the taxes coming from within the government. Would you encourage that they can borrow and invest in infrastructure and tourism so that with these investments, the unemployed graduates can have jobs within their own states?
You borrow, yes. You have to borrow. You have to borrow. If you borrow to put your money into roads, into hydroelectric dams, power stations, into education, into healthcare, you must borrow. You must borrow. You have done worse than that by borrowing and doing nothing with it, but just subsidizing something which is just white elephant projects. Building schools that are not used because no teachers, no equipment for schools and things like that. You have to build capacity. I was in Nepal some months ago. Nepalese, I don't know whether you have Nepalese here, but I talked to several prime ministers in Nepal. Nepal has been fighting this civil war for years, for decades. Now the Maoists has won. There's no more Maoists in China. There are a lot of Maoists in Nepal, which is a very strange thing. So the Maoists are they won the war. I talked to the last prime minister 2 months ago, end of last year. He said, I won the war. I could not win the peace. I said, you have not decided to do any economic policy. Since you won the war, what you've been doing is politicking, agreeing who is going to take over the role of the finance minister, who is going to write a new constitution. But the thing that Nepal has been needing, UN has written a report for Nepal 10 years ago that you have so many rivers, water, high mountains. You have one of the cleanest source of energy. You build 10 dams, and you should borrow to build the 10 dams. And everybody is willing to lend you money. ADB, Asian Development Bank, willing to lend money. World Bank willing to lend money. Chinese government willing to lend money. Indian government would like to lend money. You build 10 dams. You produce about 1,000 megawatts of electricity. You use only 200 megawatts. The rest of 800, you sell it to Bangladesh, India, and everywhere else. And the money will pay back itself. This has happened in Laos with that building of dams. But because of politicking, internal issues, they never even agree on to build any one dam. This was the first time I went there, and I got a promise from them, not going to be the first dam of a few hundred megawatts in one of their rivers. They have huge rivers. And these are very clean water, very clean way of producing power. They can sell the savings of emission of that even. They can sell that because they are saving emission of carbon dioxide by producing it from power. The only problem they have with their own trade union, the trade union doesn't want them to go and build dams because they allege that you have to move people. Of course you have to move people. But people need electricity. In Nepal, it's 60% of the day brown out. Children at home cannot do homework. Women cannot do their work, cannot cook. They don't have electricity, they don't have healthcare. So basic is that to have electricity first, and then you can have everything. So you invest in all sorts of things. And I recommend the same thing in Africa. Africa is full with huge rivers. The Niger, the Zambezi, the Nile, everywhere. No dams being built in a way that you can make use of it. And always very much among neighbors quarreling and not having it is. You have to decide it and produce it and even borrow. Roads are now being built. This is the first thing that I think it's worthwhile projects. The north-south and east-west roads linking Africa are being put into practice because of the infrastructure fund that's been put up by World Bank and African Development Bank. This is a good thing. So please, don't be afraid of government. Be afraid of government borrowings in the past. When they didn't do anything, they borrow a lot of money and put the things into let's say like steel plants, some projects that doesn't produce anything. Steel plants, they don't need steel, they can't produce steel, although they have some iron ores, because you don't have the capacity, you don't have technology. So there are things that Africa should do and invest. Infrastructure is a main heading. Infrastructure is one thing, agriculture is a second thing. At the Maputo meeting 10 years ago, African leaders agreed to put 10% of their budget into agriculture every year, 10%. They don't meet that. If they don't meet that, I think they should borrow and put it in agriculture. Investment in agriculture is so crucial because Africa cannot depend on the food market to feed itself. You would have starvation all over times and time every year. It's become a recurrent issue. It's not an emergency anymore, crisis. Every year you have starvation problems in Africa because you are told mainly by the World Bank or the IMF, who rely on the food markets. You can go and buy your food. You cannot do that. The food market, at good time, people subsidize. You can have cheap products, so you forego your production. But when the time you have food crisis, they block. They have food for export restraint. So again, investment in infrastructure, investment in agriculture, and there's so many things. We have written reports after reports and done so much work. But there's so many people recommending to Africa, and most of the time, UN, we don't come with money, you see. We come with ideas and honest broker kind of recommendation. We don't have money like the IMF and the World Bank. So you have to follow places where there are money, and that's always something which is always dubious. In Egypt, I had the same problem. Egypt went into this kind of crisis, inequality, lack of domestic capacity of investment, mainly the same thing with a kind of over-hasty privatization, liberalization of their market, opening up of their market without doing anything domestically to strengthen their own productive capacity. They have to do that all over again.
Dr. Supachai, thank you very much. I think that was really inspiring for all of us. Relevant for not only Africa, but really the entire world in terms of especially what's needed to move forward to develop. So I think it was an excellent way also of bringing some conclusion to the discussion that we had. I wish we could go on. I think there are many other questions there, but unfortunately I know you have limited time as well. We're going to try to squeeze in an interview with you downstairs before we head to the airport. And then we're very happy to have the chance also to introduce our next speaker. But before I do that, I would be very, very happy if we could all join in an expression of our sincere gratitude to both of our speakers, and especially Dr. Supachai for the keynote address. Thank you very much.